Start when I close the door.
Yes. Perfect. Okay, well, I think we're about ready to get started. So good afternoon, everyone, both in person, and I hear we have a lot of people online as well. So hi to everyone joining us online. My name is Laura Foster, and I am the Head of Tech and Innovation at techUK. While I'm actually going to hand over to my wonderful colleague, Chris, to chair most of this session today, I did briefly want to come in and welcome everyone to this event, and importantly, welcome everyone to techUK's Cloud Week. I want to start by giving a huge thank you to KPMG for sponsoring today's event and providing refreshments for everyone here in person after the panel session today. So like I said, this is techUK's annual Cloud Computing Week, which is the opportunity for techUK to bring together the cloud community and our members to highlight any new areas of thought leadership and showcase the amazing technologies that many of you in this room today are working on. Now, Cloud Week lasts the full 5 days, and each day covers a different theme. And throughout the week, we will be sharing thought leadership insights, hosting events, showcasing some of these days. So the themes that we're discussing, so today is digital transformation and business productivity. So this today's theme, so welcome all to that. Tomorrow, we'll be looking at cloud in the public sector. Wednesday, we'll be looking at optimization for sustainability. Thursday is looking at multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. And finally, Friday is looking at the role that cloud will play in the convergence of emerging technologies, whether that is high-performance computing or quantum computing. Personally, my favourite theme being head of tech and innovation there. Good to bring it all together. Like I said, we have a huge amount of interesting and insightful content being published by our members throughout this week. So please do keep an eye as that is being published. But if you have any questions at all about Cloud Week or generally about what we do at techUK, please don't hesitate to reach out either to myself or my colleague Chris, who are more than happy to help answer any questions that you might have. So with that out the way, on to today's event. Today, we're going to be discussing that day one theme on productivity and the role that cloud computing and digital transformation more broadly can play in unlocking productivity for UK businesses. The UK has a well-documented productivity challenge, and some might even say sluggish economic growth. And as we move towards a general election, this is definitely going to be a theme that plays out there. As we look towards that change in government, we are asking our members to think about how cloud computing and technologies like AI, those associated technologies that go along with cloud, can help businesses be more efficient, innovative, and productive. Thankfully, it's not my role to answer that question today. We've got a whole wonderful array of speakers who are going to be joining us here. And from about 3:30, maybe 3:40, we are going to have a panel that's going to deep dive into those themes. However, before that, I am delighted to now introduce to the stage Adrian Bradley, who is the Head of Cloud Transformation at KPMG, who is going to give us some opening remarks and help set the scene for today's discussion. So welcome to the stage.
Great, thank you very much, Laura, and thank you to you, to Chris, and to the techUK team for organising today's event and for organising this great Cloud Week. Remember, cloud is not just for Christmas, by the way, though it is forever. Cloud Week has become an important fixture in the UK tech industry's calendar, and it brings key industry participants together to make us more effective collectively. And it's great to see so many people here in the room and also online. KPMG are delighted to sponsor today's event. The relationship between the technologies that we specialise in cloud and the UK's productivity is a really crucial topic for the technology sector in all its forms. Government, industry, academia, and the partnerships that we all forge together to solve these problems. So I only hope I open this topic up productively. I want to cover 3 areas. What do we mean by productivity? How does digital transformation influence it? And what can we do as cloud professionals about it? So firstly, what do we mean by productivity? Well, the busy beavers at the Productivity Institute have described that the UK's experienced significantly slower productivity growth than comparable countries over the decade and a half since the global financial crisis. So since 2008, our GDP, the total value of the goods and services we produce, has been slower than countries that we would consider similar to us, like the Eurozone. We've grown our GDP about 0.5% annually in that time, compared to just under 2% for Germany. Vorsprung der Technik. Would anyone care to translate that? Absolutely, advantage through engineering or technology, if we want to kind of translate it for us as well. But what I think what's worst of all is that we don't even get the long lunches that some of our peer laggards enjoy. And can I say that both HR and marketing were very insistent that I couldn't name anyone in that particular category, but I'm sure we can hazard guesses. Anyway, without good productivity, we can't improve living standards and well-being. This is actually quite an important point. Slower population growth will make the challenge of improving productivity over the next decade a daunting one. And if the current trend in productivity growth continues to be slow for the next 2 decades, then it won't be possible to maintain current living standards for our children and grandchildren, let alone deliver sustainability and improved well-being, which is what I think we'd all want to do. Economists highlight 3 causes of low productivity growth in the UK: underinvestment in skills, assets and capabilities, slow spread of productivity enhancing practices, and fragmentation of policy. And all of these causes are relevant to digital transformation and what we do in cloud to improve productivity. Once our clients have finished all of their S4 investments and so on, which seem to be so popular, if that's the right word, then cloud is often their next biggest technology investment. It's the thing which will make the most difference to most enterprises. And it's foundational for so much digital technology, from analytics to AI, IoT, mobility. And this means that as the broader cloud industry, it's our technology and the way that we execute it, which is at the heart of the capabilities that will unlock better productivity growth. There are few infrastructure interventions that therefore have the same level of impact as cloud can have. But it's clearly crucial we spread these capabilities as quickly as we can. It's not enough to get there eventually. Productivity growth is about speed to get there as well. And given the CMA investigations into cloud in the UK, it's clear that policy will have a big say on the speed of diffusion and the ease of cloud use in the coming 2 years. Moving to the second topic, how does digital technology influence productivity? Now, I won't take you through the A to Z or perhaps the AI to Z scalar of use cases, because there'll be plenty of these discussed through the week. And Laura summarised, I think, nicely the topics that we're going to cover this week. Nor do I want to talk about the key vectors by which it improves productivity, like enabling agility and improving collaboration, insight, innovation, sharing and bursting capacity and security and so forth. But rather, I want to make the point that digital technology influences productivity by being used, and more specifically by being used to create value rather than just being the next upgrade. Therefore, how quickly and easily we as an industry enable high quality use of cloud that actually has an impact is paramount. And it's these themes that run as a thread through Cloud Week: making cloud efficient and therefore affordable, investing in transformation, building the skills across the UK to enable its exploitation, and the policy implications to encourage that, whether it be through regulatory interventions on interoperability or R&D tax relief. So, for example, if we look across the Atlantic, the American government has guaranteed a $50 billion book of business to incentivize chip manufacturers to build the next generation of chip factories onshore in the US. It's that scale of ambition that I think we need to talk about if cloud is really to move the dial. And dare I say it, sometimes enabling this high quality use of cloud will also entail not using public cloud necessarily. The next 18 months, I believe, will see more changes in cloud economics than the previous 5 years combined. Enterprises will need to adapt their strategy and practices to deliver best value against this backdrop of change, as the supply chain for cloud components becomes more constrained, as the demand increases through AI, and as regulatory interventions take their effect. Tomorrow, KPMG will publish a thought leadership paper that argues that this drives premiumization of hyperscale cloud, with exponentially greater value delivered through higher cost services on public cloud, and the potential for the increasing costs of that consumption to be offset by increasingly competitive non-hyperscale infrastructure in private clouds and on-premise for lower value workloads. Getting this right frees cash for investment and gets maximum impact for those investments, but also it moves us into a world where we need to think more dynamically about where that value comes from and more dynamically about how our estates and environments have an effect on that. So finally, what can we do as cloud professionals to make the most of this influence? And I pick out three key things: strategy, skills, and speed. Strategy is about knowing why you do cloud. Digital technology influences productivity by being used to do specific things better. Knowing what those things are in your enterprise's unique position is essential. And with the pace of innovation and trends towards premiumization, this needs to be frequently reevaluated. It's not enough for us to be the best at technology. We need to understand how to apply it for best effect. Skills in the broadest sense, not only creating high caliber local technology talent, but also improving the dissemination of skills across the business workforce, including those who we wouldn't traditionally see as technologists, whether that be technology curious leaders or tech savvy users. And we all have a role to play in this. It was great, for example, at the weekend to see 7 to 12-year-olds doing a kids code event at KPMG's Leeds office as part of the digital festival. And finally, speed. It matters how quickly we adopt the right cloud capabilities. There's a danger of underinvestment or delayed investment, or it being too hard to invest now. And that results in requirements for a focus, for example, on legacy obsolescence that we've seen in government by not intervening early. I want to finish, though, by coming back to our title, the UK's productivity crisis. And I don't like the word crisis because I prefer to be a bit more optimistic. We do have world-leading use of cloud in many parts of the UK, and we do have, I believe, a world-class workforce around cloud in the UK. I've no doubt about that. Perhaps this is actually a productivity opportunity, and I think that people to grasp it are the people who have come to today's event in the room and online. So hopefully our discussion helps stimulate a few ideas. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming, those here in person and for those who are online. As Laura said at the beginning, my name is Chris and I'm Certification Program Manager for Cloud Tech and Innovation. I'll be moderating the session today. And thanks, Adrian, for that fantastic opening remark and setting the scene. I really liked the thread you were drawing out there about the difference between cloud adoption and effective use of cloud to add value. And as you said, we'll be drawing that out throughout the themes throughout the rest of Cloud Week. So we've got a big panel and we've got lots to discuss. So I will keep my remarks to a minimum. The panel can introduce themselves much better than I can. So starting with Vicky, do you want to introduce yourselves and say a bit about yourself and your organisation?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Vicky Wills. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at a company called Exclaimer. We're a SaaS company in the email space. My background is software engineering, so I was a hands-on engineer for a lot of years, mostly back-end engineering. And at Exclaimer, I have the lovely role of running both technology and product, which kind of sums up what I like to do. I like to build products that people use and hopefully like and find value from. And obviously, a lot of my career has been based around leveraging cloud computing as well. So excited for the panel today.
Great. Adrian Bradley. I lead KPMG's cloud practice in the UK. So 650 engineers, consultants, architects, all doing cloudy things.
Bearden. I lead the cloud strategy and emerging technology side of the business for Slalom Consulting. So similar to KPMG, a full service consulting firm focused on the people side of things. And I support across both UK and I and EMEA.
Confusing me a second, Marcus. My name is Marcus Bonner. I'm the Chief Technologist at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. I've been there about 5 years, and my main focus is on hybrid cloud and artificial intelligence.
Good afternoon, Chris Tuite, Director of Central Government at Microsoft. Been at Microsoft about 10 years, and obviously from my accent, some of that was not in the UK. I started my career in the civil service, and so I'm passionate about public sector and helping drive digital transformation in the public sector.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. Two Marcus, two Chris's. We'll try not to let that get too confusing. So I think I want to start off with kind of a broad question around where you see the key opportunities for digital transformation in helping unlock some of those productivity challenges that Adrian was setting out at the start, and helping businesses and individuals be more kind of efficient and productive in their daily lives, and perhaps where you see the role of cloud and other technologies delivered through cloud in facilitating that. Vicky, do you want to kick us off?
More questions to kick us off. So I think, obviously at the core of cloud for me, one of the wonderful things about cloud is the capabilities it gives you out of the box without that upfront investment. So I think one of the biggest opportunities for digital transformation is being able to leverage new technologies, leverage the very best technologies from the big cloud providers without organizations having to do that upfront outlay for hardware or for capabilities in their own organization. So I think, we see quite a lot of organizations. We used to be an on-prem product. Exclaimer's been around for about 15 years. So our first version of the product, I wasn't with the company at the time, was an on-premise product. So we've taken customers through that journey, and we're still taking some big customers through that journey as well. And it's really interesting to see the sorts of capabilities, like we can offer a much better product by hosting in the cloud for our customers. So I think there's a huge opportunity to level up in terms of the capabilities that companies can get from their technologies in the cloud.
Chris, do you want to come in, speaking of the cloud providers?
Yeah, so I think the key, and I like Adrian's thread on this, the key is transformation. I think the key is what we use the tech for. And yes, I completely agree that the barrier to entry for enterprise scale capabilities is lower than it's ever been, and for those capabilities to be secure, which is a thread that runs through everything that you can do with digital transformation. But the transformation is the key, and Adrian's point I think was spot on. Doing things that we've done before in the cloud is not transformational. The transformation comes from doing things different because of what we can do in the cloud. And I think there is a lot of organizations have a lot of legacy that is one of the challenges that was called out in the report that Adrian mentioned that needs to be overcome in order for some of that to be realised, and the transformation can happen alongside that. New things can happen and be built alongside that legacy if it's too slow and expensive to move beyond. So I think there are amazing opportunities, and the UK is one of the leading economies in the world when it comes to technology investment and technology innovation and AI innovation. And so the interesting thing, I agree, I don't like the concept of a crisis. I'm much more optimistic that with the capabilities that exist here and the broadly favourable market conditions, the opportunity exists for a lot of transformation to drive productivity at pace. Like I've been thinking deeply, and a lot of people have been sort of looking at the bigger picture of, well, why isn't that happening? Why have we got slow productivity? And Adrian also touched on skills, and I think the broadest possible perception of the term skills gives us some insight into people's broad mentality around what digital can do, the mindset around, or the lack of digital optimism or digital confidence that lets people be brave and take decisions to do things differently. And it's really funny, we're in 2024 and people are still talking about how amazing it was during COVID that they could take decisions and do things. There was this confidence, well, they had to, there was this forcing factor. And yet so much of that, and so much transformation happened in such a short space of time, and yet so much of that has dissipated. And how do we get, for me, the big question is, how do we get back the motivation to take decisions and do things in an environment where we're thankfully not being forced to?
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting point. That's not the only way in which time stopped for COVID.
No.
Marcus, either Marcus?
Yeah, I think, Vicky, you made an interesting point thinking about the users, right? And getting technology in the hands of users. And I think that's often a bit of an underlooked element when we sit up here and we talk about modernization and digital transformation, all these fun, fancy words. When you look at the impact of that, if we start at the user and work backwards, I don't know of a single employee, public or private, that enjoys working in a legacy environment. How many times have we all had to do duplicate entry across systems or worked on a grayscale monitor that makes your eyes want to bleed? Like, it's an awful experience. And studies have countless times shown that an engaged workforce is a more productive workforce. No one likes working on legacy systems. So if we look at the users and how we can have an impact on them, how do we get people engaged? How do we get people motivated? Yes, modernizing these legacy systems, decomposing these monolithic mainframes into more modern consumable platforms, those are all wonderful things for the business, but that will then also increase the engagement of the users, which will help get more done, and it creates that snowball effect. So I think that's an element that I find we often miss in those discussions as we start talking about it from a technology perspective. When, one of the things I've always said is I'm not a technologist. I started out as a developer. I've played in that space for a long time, but I'm not a technologist. I get excited about what impact we can have with the tech. And so for me, I think, okay, let's modernize it so we can create a better experience so that people use it more and we can get done, people enjoy it. Like, that's more where my, kind of head jumps to.
So there was an article in the Financial Times recently that said it costs this country about £7.2 billion a year in lost productivity through poor customer service. And you have that point where you want to send an email, but you can't to an organisation, and you know that means you need to make a phone call, and your heart sinks because there's 30 minutes. And it goes, we're experiencing unusually high call volumes. You're like, no, you're not. Those are your call volumes, and you know that, right?
Yep.
And I make that point because that is a depressing thing when we need to talk to a provider, and I don't mean cloud, I mean our bank, utility company, wherever it might be. And cloud and AI have a great ability to address a lot of that, to scale up on a Saturday morning when we all get to our post and go, here we go, right? I've got to wade through this stuff. Why can't there be more capability at that point that then gets scaled back? Right? We have email systems that filter for content. Why can't they read the email that says, I'd like to change this detail about my policy? It's relatively straightforward stuff, but we have to get on the phone, or we send an email, or the classic one, we talk to the bot misunderstands us, we ask the question again, and it says, I just answered your question. It's, no, you haven't. So I think there's a huge potential there. And it also makes us a lot happier because our heart sinks when we have to get into this kind of thing. So cloud, that ability to scale up, that ability to apply AI to these kinds of problems would make our lives as consumers considerably more satisfactory when we have to engage in those ways.
I think that speaks directly to Adrian's point about improving quality of life at the beginning. I can't tell you how much I would like for that problem to be solved. Adrian, do you want to round us up on this first question, but also maybe pivot to the next question I was going to ask, which is how well, you've all kind of touched a little bit on the difference between sort of cloud adoption and effective use of cloud to deliver value and to actually kind of change the way that you're doing your business. And I'm just wondering how you think the UK is doing it, kind of adapting to the pace of change in the tech sector and the transition to a more consumption-based model of computing and the potential for that kind of more dynamic, adaptive way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think it will become more dynamic. I mean, I really agreed with the use cases, and the only thing I'll build on that is we live in an era that is marked by supply chain and geopolitical disruption, and I actually wonder if as often parts of the supply chain are some of the least effective adopters of cloud, some of the heavy industries, and they almost need it the most in order to respond to those geopolitical disruptions. So I actually wonder if some of the use cases that we see will make most of the difference are the ones that are actually the ones that have been hardest to date, so they impact the stodgiest industries, but they do so with the most advanced technology. And I actually think in the next 3 years, we may be surprised at some of the adoption. And how effective is the UK generally? I mean, one of those two things that economists cite as a cause of low productivity is speed of diffusion. So how quickly does the most effective and most productive practices spread across different kinds of organizations and spread across different locations? And I think that's where we see actually the biggest problem. We have some of the best adoption globally in the UK. We can cite some of the best use cases, but also we still have some of the worst outliers. Customer service being a great exemplar of that, right? And particularly, actually, that's where there are companies that have not been built in the cloud, and that speed of adoption, I think, needs to be quicker. I think skills is a part of that, and 3 years ago, when the market was a lot hotter, it really felt like developer skills were the big problem. Whereas now I actually think it's the ability to disseminate sufficient knowledge across, and for me, it's two big cohorts, and others will probably be able to add more. But for me, it's the technology leadership, and actually not just the technology leadership, the business leadership. And it's then the kind of business users who need to know enough about the potential of cloud to then execute. About 4 years ago, I did a project for a guy called Murray Alkenloss, who's now the CEO of BP. He was then the CFO of their upstream division. And he was asking just really intelligent questions around, it was around an AI project, and he was asking about the difference between neural networks and more machine learning kinds of things. But most of all, what he was exhibiting was curiosity. Right? And I wonder if there's enough curiosity out there amongst senior business and perhaps even public sector organizations at the very top, to lead as quickly as we need to.
Yeah, I think that's a great point around skills. I also think that sometimes, I mean, we talk an awful lot about skills, but often that debate, at least in the techUK community, it's weighted heavily towards like the technical skills we need to implement the technical solution, and less the kind of broader digital literacy and mindset shift and understanding that the rest of the organization needs to do that part two, that effective use of cloud that we're talking about. Vicky, can I bring you in here on this question of how well do you think we're doing at adapting to that consumption-based model? I think you're coming at it from a SaaS space. I'm just wondering how many organizations that have used Exclaimer's product end up using kind of all of the bells and whistles that they could be to get the most out of it.
So, well, we see a real mix, having been around for as many years as we have been. We've got, customers that are treating it from a very sort of utility point of view. We see people using it as a digital marketing tool and everything in between. But I think the point that's been made by a few people actually is really interesting about these digital transformation projects, and talking about the shortage of technical skills, talking about being technology-led rather than value-led. I think trying to find the value in these types of projects is where a lot of companies trip over, because they naturally, if you try and replace everything at once, you try and replace all your processes, you try and replace all your technology, you're building yourselves into a skills gap problem, because you need to do everything at once. You need a huge workforce, you need a huge amount of change, then you need endless project managers to see everything through. Whereas if you can say, well, value looks like this, and we're gonna take a slice through that, and we're gonna try and, it's more motivating, it's more effective as well. So I think there's I think what you said was really interesting about not letting technology lead. Technology is an implementation detail. Cloud is an incredibly useful tool, but it's not the aim. The aim is to drive better value for your business. And I think that's where, especially in the last few years, I think the role of a CTO has become more business focused than technology focused. Yes, my job is to make sure Exclaimer gets the best value out of its product and technology, but ultimately I'm there to generate value for the business. And I think the digital literacy point comes back into that as well, because what we don't need is a bunch of people who can tell you the intricacies of coding. Like that's useful, but actually how you apply technology and how you get back to that value as quickly as possible, that's where the secret is. And I think sometimes we lose ourselves in these massive projects. And I think that's where that's where the fast lane is. you don't have to do the whole project to generate a huge amount of value and motivation, making things better for people, highly engaged workforce, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it all snowballs from there, but getting over that first hurdle isn't easy.
I think one of the things that jumps out at me there is, when you think about delivering value quickly, we talk about public sector a lot. One of the challenges in public sector, the average tenure for a CIO in the public sector is 2 to 3 years, whereas in private, it's 4 to 6 years. These digital transformation initiatives, when you look at them as one large monolithic program, are massive. They take, 5, 7, 8 years for certain organizations. BP, it'd be 15 plus, right? They've been working on it for a while. And if you don't think about, if organizations, and this is a really big challenge in the public sector, is how do you create mechanisms that allow you to demonstrate value quickly? I think what France is doing is really interesting with the whole GovTech initiative. They've got 16 different incubators led by different ministries, and they're creating procurement models that are designed for quick value delivery. So I think when we think about skill shortages, when we think about how do we move quickly to embrace these technologies in various other, parts other than just London, how do we do that by delivering value quickly? But how do we enable that upstream, whether that's through procurement frameworks, whether that's through how we encourage technology and business leadership to look for that quick value versus the 3-4 year transformation program? That's great, but what can you show me in 6 months? What can you show me in 9 months? How you get that value quickly, I think we have such a good opportunity there. And to your point earlier, COVID showed we can do it. How do we now leverage the learnings from that to go and execute on?
I think also investors don't place enough value on the quality of a company's technology strategy. And actually that's true both of investors, but also regulators, because both focus a little too much, I think, on short-term financial outputs for entirely understandable reasons. But for example, I don't think that there's a sufficient upweighting of value on evidence that a company is making meaningful technology investments that are differentiated from their peers and that are being executed excellently. You only get the reward for that when you see the results. Whereas if we're going to drive speed of innovation, then shareholders and investors need to factor that in a lot more, and regulators in their context where, for example, utilities have regulated prices. Factoring that in, I think, incentivizes that ability to invest quickly and invest more early on to drive that value.
Before we move on, I just want to bring in Chris and Marcus on this question of the difference between sort of technology adoption and value creation, and perhaps touching on the question I asked at the beginning around how well you think we're doing in terms of shifting to that consumption based. Cloud's always sold as being agile and flexible and scalable, and so many organizations aren't using it in that way.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that question in particular, and careful what I say, but provide a little bit of insight. The first is just on that point about digital optimism and for the UK in particular. And don't quote me on the stats because I may have got it wrong, but I think it was something like 127 tech unicorns in the UK last year, and nearly 250 what they call futurecorns anticipated to have that sort of $1 billion valuation in the future. That's a lot. It really is. It's a significant. And so I think in the cloud native or digital native technology space, where new businesses are coming up out of and built on cloud technologies, there's a lot of reason for optimism, and there's a good amount of adoption of that capability in the UK, more than I expected and more than a lot of other countries. So there's reason to be optimistic, and there's some really great adoption happening there. We look at established enterprises, there's probably no surprise to most people that the highest, and yes, I agree with the point that cloud adoption, if you just call it that, in the UK is really high. But when you talk about cloud and the value of the cloud service that cloud services can provide, when you talk about PaaS, not IaaS, actually the adoption's relatively low. The proportion of spend on cloud that is on storage and virtual machines is way more than anything else, and the value that can be unlocked from cloud services actually exists predominantly in all of the other services that cloud can provide. So those startups are not using virtual machines; they're creating serverless applications, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a challenge around the adoption of proper cloud, if I can call it that, in established enterprises. That is maybe the adoption numbers don't tell the full story. But the other bit that I think is a challenge that we need to figure out how to tackle, and this is a combination of, I guess, the regulatory environment as well as some I guess established ways of thinking, if we can call them that, is in government-funded research, where the policy setting and the framework for funding research is to spend CapEx, which means people are buying things, buying computers, not necessarily encouraged to leverage and adopt cloud services, which potentially could be slowing the pace of innovation that the country is capable of.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So I think that's a good segue to my next question, which is going to be around kind of barriers to realizing some of this value and getting the most out of your cloud investment and what we'd like to see from government or industry. But Marcus, do you want to transition us to that topic around challenges and perhaps comment anything you wanted to on this round?
So I'll focus on the AI part of that. So there are a lot of science projects out there, but to echo the point that people started from the technology and tried to head towards some kind of output, because this is a good idea, quote unquote. Cloud is a good idea, quote unquote. So let's start from there and let's build something and they will come, but actually they don't. It just stops there.
100%.
But if you start from where do we want to be as a business, to echo back to that, and therefore where do these things play a part in that? Back to your point, if it's IaaS that's the predominant part, and it is, of course, that means that people just pick stuff up and moved it over here. And that hasn't really provided them with any benefit. And cloud risks having a backlash against that, not because there's anything inherently at fault with cloud, but the way that we've used it and adopted it has not allowed its benefits to shine.
Vicky, if you want to come in, I see you nodding furiously.
Well, I'll always nod furiously when somebody's talking about the value generated, not the technology itself. But I would like to go back to a point you were making, Chris, about technology startups, because as you say, there's a huge number of unicorns now in the UK, and I'm lucky enough to have worked with two of them through that scaling journey, either as a hands-on engineer or as a technology leader for one of them. And we're good in the startup space in the UK at having big ideas about innovating, pushing boundaries, going back to the point around, curious, exactly how we value things, like having technology strategies that are longer running. When it comes to valuing that, that's where I think we've got a problem in the UK, because if you look at the translation of the valuations of unicorns versus the listings that we have, we're seeing IPOs flop in the UK. We're seeing people go over to the States, listing on NASDAQ instead of the London Stock Exchange. I think we've got a real piece, and if I can sort of tenuously tie it back to the point Adrian was making, I think the way that we value longer term technology strategies has to change. We have to see that value from that change in the world that we're trying to create, not just the operational efficiency. And that's where I think we've seen that push go, to your point, around just lifting and shifting onto the cloud. If you just lift and shift, why? You're not going to get any value from that. Or I think for me, slightly worse is if you lift and shift and try and use it as a headcount cutting exercise, you're trying to drive operational efficiencies. How is that engaging for your workforce? How is that generating value? What you're saying to your workforce is you're not valuable, rather than saying, actually, you should be valuable in a different way. You should be doing the things that computers can't do, because that is where value sits. That's where I think we need to rethink our definition of value in technology strategy, being able to translate all the amazing work we've got in startups in the UK into actual, longer term performance, and also leveraging the workforce in a different way, not just looking at headcount cutting exercises, which I think we've kind of fallen into a trap of in recent times.
And I really wanted to echo your point around the valuations, because my colleagues who work in financial services tell me that there's not enough money in the London stock market. And if you look at the wave of growth that was unleashed by the wave of deregulation of the financial markets in the 1980s. We need something that's an equivalent of that for the ability to multiply the value of the technology firms we create. You know, we don't have fewer we don't lack a UK version of Apple and Microsoft because we lack the wherewithal to create it nationally. You know, our fortitude and intellect is sufficient, I believe, but you know, it's that the market conditions haven't been created to do that. But more prosaically, on an everyday level, I think the barriers to adoption in a lot of our clients who are more established enterprises is that they've muddled into various different positions, some of which are very intelligent and sensible around cloud in certain parts of their estate, and some of which reflect inertia, indecision, or kind of failed decisions. And too few of them take a step back and really think about that. Where should certain workloads be? What capabilities am I going to exploit a lot more of in the next 3 years? And therefore, I need to have my data in certain places. I need to move this workload from IaaS to PaaS so that I can better exploit it. There's still a lack of a controlling mind. And I would argue that the pace at which you need to do that is going to become faster in the next 3 years. If you don't get that dynamism, then you will use cloud less efficiently, and you will be less able to access the value it allows you to multiply it. So that kind of step back intelligence, I think, is key.
I just want to say we're going to be taking some Q&A shortly, both from online, if you're watching online, and from in the room. So have a think about what you might want to ask the panel or contribute to the discussion. Marcus, do you want to come in on this question around kind of challenges and what you'd like to see from industry or government to try and kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit on the earlier question. I think to your point around the industries that are maybe not adopting as quickly. So, you know, manufacturing is a great example. Public sector is another one where we see those challenges. You know, I think there's opportunities now. Public cloud, hybrid cloud, those things have been around for a long time at this point. We've had the opportunity to prove out the risk models associated with them. And, you know, oftentimes when organizations look for new leadership, you know, we talked earlier about the transition timeframes for CIOs and other executives. When they look for new leadership, they often look for people from within their bubble. You know, in consulting, we get asked all the time, hey, do you have someone that knows X, Y, and Z from this particular industry because I'm a special snowflake and they need to know my business? Yes, you are, but so is everyone, right? How do you leverage the insights and experience from someone who comes from financial services? And how do you apply that in manufacturing? Right? How do you take one regulated industry that's traditionally moved slow, where we're actually seeing some pretty good uptick in modern technology, and then apply that to some of the other ones? So I would encourage, you know, public sector, I would encourage private sector to look across industry at where are you seeing those successes that is really driving strong technology strategy, and how do you bring that in to be part of your organization? You know, we talk at a personal level around identity being important. You know, it's not, I want to go to the gym, it's I am someone who goes to the gym. Well, become a digitally motivated organization. Embrace that as your identity and bring in leaders that help support that. I think that's what I would like to see more of.
It's interesting. All of the challenges you mentioned so far have been on the people side and not all about the tech. So transitioning us to the next set of questions, Chris, I just want to ask whether you think, you know, the title on the slide, dropping the word crisis, was, you know, the contribution that cloud can make and digital transformation more broadly can make to the productivity puzzle. And I'm just wondering what you think in terms of how much of that can actually be solved by a tech solution, or how much of the problem is kind of neglect of human capital and getting the right kind of structures and organizational structure and culture in place.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think I'd use the language neglect of human capital, but I would probably say that I don't think any of those challenges can be solved just by technology. And so it's appropriate that the challenges that are being raised, I think, are around skills, around motivation, around mindset that I've raised before. Like, we're all seeing that the people need to change in order for anything to change. What the technology, modern technology can provide, and modern cloud technology and AI can provide. I think everyone's seen amazing examples of, and again, of reasons for optimism about what problems can be solved. And I think we've talked about some of the missing ingredients from a leadership perspective, that curiosity, the intent to explore, the intent to drive change, and at the same time, the need to ground that in, the fundamentals. Effectively, cloud can, provide you anything from a digital perspective. People can start up new company. I read a story about a kid who started a company on his phone on a flight. Had the idea at the start of the flight and had a company up and running in the cloud at the end of the flight. Like the art of the possible, and people don't realize you can do that, but he legitimately did everything that was needed.
Born in the cloud.
Literally born in the. Thank you. But it's actually possible. It was a long flight. It's actually possible, and so I think that the technology is not the constraint to that point. So I don't think human capital being overlooked or neglected is the issue. I think humans being the focus of transformation, as opposed to tech being the focus. And I think many of the comments from the panel here today have echoed that. The people, leadership, people who need skills, the people with ideas, people with their phones switched on, is where the focus needs to be to realise the productivity opportunity that cloud provides. Focus also needs to be on security, and on getting your data in shape for any established enterprise. Like the only things that you need to go and sort out is I've got good data and it's secure, because then you can create, and this is, I think, one thing that we don't see enough of happening in any sector, except for in those startups, is you've got good data and you've got security, and now you can create the space for people to be innovative, to be creative, to be, to come up with ideas and execute them. And actually, because all those other services in cloud are really, really cheap, you can experiment and try things. And the only constraints you need to have in place is having clean data and good security.
I think it's a great point. It builds on what Vicky was saying earlier about being kind of workforce first and people first. Vicky, do you want to expand a bit on kind of the approach that you take and explain that?
Sure. Well, I think Chris has summed it up beautifully. Make sure your data's in a good place. Make sure it's secure. Make sure your teams have got space and and I don't just mean Friday afternoons are for innovation, like actual company objectives that encourage that innovation. Set outcomes, not outputs, for teams. State where you want the company to be. I think that's our job as leaders, is to paint a vision of where the company could be. Put the guide rails in as strategy, but then really let people bring that creativity and bring that flair. There's so much talent, and I think all these disciplines together. If you think about product, technology, operational disciplines, the thing that brings them together for me is design thinking. And design thinking requires space, it requires time, it requires that innovation, that creativity. And that's that's a skill that I think we can actually put a way more emphasis on as leaders to train people up in, because it's all very well to be an expert in a particular niche, but design thinking for me is the thing that brings it all together. And that is, going back, that's the art of the possible. That's everything we're talking about. Now, what you encounter beyond that, when you get your product out to market, anything can happen, right? And innovation is as much about failing as it is about succeeding. You can create the perfect conditions and 9 out of 10 of your experiments will fail, but that one will go right, and it could change your entire business. And you've got to sort of hold your nerve, I think, as well, when you get, and it's easier. Startups are hard, they're chaotic, and there's all sorts going on at once. But the thing that you do have is that capital to lean on and to say, there are no expectations in this period of time, of continued revenue growth or whatever it might be. It by design, it creates that space. And I think larger enterprises can benefit from that approach as well, if they truly let that happen. I've seen you know, I was in insurtech for a little while, so we got to know some of the big insurers, and some of them were doing some really interesting projects. And they've got so much data. Like, you know, you look at the resources they have, and you're like, my God, if we could just get our hands on that as a startup, that would be incredible. But then they strangle the projects as well, because they put all these reporting mechanisms in and all these time, like, you know, they take a project management approach to innovation. And for me, that sort of just makes me feel a bit funny about it. It's like, that's not what you're trying to do, but you do need to be accountable for an outcome. But the approach is very different. So I could go on about this all day. I'm gonna stop talking. Let somebody else talk.
I think you're right about innovation. I think your point around the space for investments, the result of investments to be realised, is important as well, because a lot of the things that superficially look like technology challenges, data being a prime example, and for example, some angles on interoperability are not the cloud provider's fault, but it's effectively the product of underinvestment historically. Therefore, you never wholly solve a problem sufficiently transformatively that the next problem becomes, you know, 1/10 of the complexity to solve, and therefore you're always chasing your tail, and you've never given yourself the space to succeed.
Do either of the Marcuses want to come in on this question around organisational culture?
Yeah, two aspects. The first is that, and I've experienced this when working for an end user, when you get a mantra like cloud, it's like, so how many people do we need back? AI, so how many people do I not need to recontract or not need to, you know, exactly what I'm getting at. And I think the other part is that something as transformative and potentially revolutionary as we've been discussing around cloud and its capabilities has been absorbed into the mainstream of an organisation. And I'm a massive fan of, I'm sure lots of other people are, Clayton Christensen and what he has to say about these things. And therefore, you know, one of the mantras is, if you bring it into the mainstream, it's just going to get absorbed. That's the point of supporting. Whereas if you keep it separate and allow it to be small and allow it to grow and allow it to show results that are small in comparison perhaps to the organisation, but nevertheless allow it to operate as its own startup, that's when these revolutionary and transformative things can blossom and grow and show success.
One last question, and then I want to move to Q&A from the audience. You mentioned AI twice now, Marcus, and a couple of other people have mentioned it. So I feel, and given that sort of hype around Gen AI over the last 12 to 18 months, I feel no techUK panel session is complete if I didn't ask a question on AI. So I'm just wondering, particularly in terms of thinking about cloud as a kind of route to market or a means of access, particularly speaking to the point Adrian was making earlier about how digital transformation isn't spread evenly across the economy or across kind of nations and regions. I'm just wondering where you think the opportunities are for AI enabled through the cloud to help unlock some of these productivity challenges, particularly in terms of not just cutting headcount, but making people more productive, making workers more productive. Does anyone want to come in on that? Perhaps Marcus, do you want to start since you're talking about AI?
And I think I'm going to be a bit finicky on this. We are, and I'm seeing it happen, we are conflating AI as a principle in ML and Gen AI. People are dropping the Gen when they're talking about this. So, and I think we need to be mindful that it's an aspect. And there was a Google engineer, and I wish I could remember their name, who said, in 10 years' time, we'll be amazed how much focus we put on text generators. It's perhaps a bit harsh, but at that point, and that we should be cautious of the idea that this is the next kind of transformative thing that's going to solve problems, as opposed to being the next spanner that's going to enable me to tighten a bolt on something. And I think if we look at it from that perspective of how can we support, back to this point, business outcomes more effectively, then we're in a much better position than considering Gen AI as a panacea for whatever it may be.
Adrian? Whether Gen or AI?
I think my personal prediction would be that I think that Gen AI is going to start to look like an efficiency play and for the next year or so, and I think the hype will level off a little bit, which will be a relief because now nobody has to feel the need to call every single Excel macro some dimension of AI. But I do wonder if there are even more exciting things beyond, and I do think there are some industries that will have some very sophisticated things with AI, but perhaps in a slightly more niche sense.
I think this is one of those, coming back to your point around security and data. You know, you look at data clean rooms, you look at all of the things that are available now to make your data accessible in a distributed way to different teams. If you can create space through, you know, to actually do that innovation, to play around with those technologies without 4 billion, you know, reports on them, you create the opportunity for innovation in the organization. You know, you've got all the data, oftentimes in various states of use, but you've got the data. You know, we talked about cloud and then AI as though they're separate. But for most organizations to leverage AI, ML, Gen AI, et cetera, you're going to need a solid cloud foundation, right? There are elements to that around data, around security, around governance, and everything else that are going to enable you to take advantage of that innovation. And I think you've got to create the space, but we've got a situation now where that technology and those capabilities are available to, you know, organizations in Yorkshire, you know, that's 16% lower than the UK average in innovation diffusion, right? So all of that exists out there. Now create the space in the organization to capitalize on it.
I think that's absolutely spot on, because I think it kind of baffles me at the moment. You walk around London, you see all these billboard ads for, you know, AI this and AI that, and you're like, what the hell does the consumer care that there's AI under the hood? What matters? And I think we need to create that space to actually create the innovation to move us away from calling it AI outwardly as well. You know, coding exists, AI exists, ML exists. Like, there's all these tools. It's an incredibly powerful one, but it's just another tool. And I think, yeah, we have to. There's so much we could do with it, but we have to create the space to do that, and we have to give it room to grow and the time.
Yeah, and treating it as normal, I think, helps that, because one of the things that comes to mind is the point around customer experience earlier. So to get a good customer experience the most cost effectively and therefore the most productively, it will become normal that's, you know, you use text generation for that or similar, and then we don't have to call up. And the companies that don't have the ability to do that, then you get an inferior customer experience. So that's why it's important.
I just want to tie this thread back to another one earlier, but I did say good data, just to be clear.
I'll start somewhere.
But I think it's a really interesting, almost a topic for a bit of debate around that conflation that we're seeing of everything being called AI and that the hype around AI, which you mentioned, there is a lot of hype. What we're seeing a bit of is some of the really amazing transformational ML work getting the attention it deserved all along, because of the hype. And I think that to me is exciting. Like, that's where there is so much transformational power, and it's not in generative pre-trained transformers. It's in true machine learning in fascinating and interesting areas, in scientific research, in medical research. The breakthroughs that are happening are game changing for the whole world and for the UK. And so I think that there is an interesting piece then when we come to the thoughts about digital leadership and that curiosity from the leaders of organisations, that the captivation of their attention coming from generative AI is also enabling everyone's minds to be opened up to what's possible with broad term AI. And so I think there's an opportunity to capitalise on that hype in a way, in the deeper and more meaningful ways than text generation. I love the quote from Google exactly when he used that.
We've got about 15 minutes left. So does anyone have any questions or comments in the audience? Harriet, do you want to take the mic round? Is the gentleman there with a question? You let us know who you are and where you're from.
Hello, Nick Patchett, Pillar Strategy. You didn't really mention trust as an issue between the tech industry and the industry end users. Essentially, when you're in industry, you don't want the tech to be changing. You want a nice, stable platform for people to learn about how to work efficiently and become productive without it continually transforming, essentially. You also need to trust you're not continually having new features that you need a load of tech minders in the company to protect the company from these new features. So what you want is a nice 5-year cycle of practically no change. You want everyone to become fully geared up with all the skills working quickly at the top of their game, and then you have your transformation project because it's 5 years and things have moved on and you need to adopt new tech. It's not about having a workforce of DevOps type end users. You don't want your end users acting as admins or configuring stuff. Where we are now is we have stuff put out all the time, new features, betas, alphas, and there's a lack of trust at the solution end, at the cloud end, and as you say, at the information and security end. So how do we solve this trust issue?
Thanks. Another question around pace of change. Anyone want to take this one?
Well, I'm happy to kick off, not least because obviously one of the things that KPMG does is audit companies. And believe you and me, persuading an audit company to spend 30 million a year on cloud is not a simple task. And actually, I think it involves, I take it back to the leadership point. It requires leaders who have the courage and the curiosity to see the potential. Now, we as the implementers of that technology, I think, have a responsibility as part of that. And that actually, the way we execute that will look differently in different companies. You know, so startups can be more nimble and dynamic. Enterprises do need to put more assurance around it. But for example, at an enterprise level, I would argue that you can build trust better through continuous monitoring, continuous code control in a well-managed, well-run cloud environment where you automate a huge amount of the control versus an environment which is much less automated and therefore more prone to manual intervention. But I think your point is a good one, actually. One of the biggest barriers is trust and is confidence at all kinds of levels, both that it creates instability, but also the sense that, you know, I once had a CFO of a utility say, and he'd been in post for a very long time, and he said, yes, I once spent 200 million on a big ERP transformation, and I'm not going to do another one in my career, you know, and it's that kind of confidence that needs.
Anyone else want to comment on this?
I'll chime in. You know, I've been the one to inherit a lot of the people side of things, and you're absolutely right. Introducing too much change that's not in a controlled fashion is just going to cause disruption. That's why having that strong leadership, having the right change management approach to these, you know, to this transformation opportunity is critical. You know, trust comes from meeting expectations that have been set appropriately. And if you think about a lot of technology programs, they're approached from a technology perspective. So technologists think, oh, this is cool, I'm just going to go and do this thing. Well, that immediately breaks down trust through the rest of the organization that's expecting a little bit more of a measured adoption cycle. And so if you've got the right level of leadership engagement combined with the proper kind of change management strategy, expectations have been set, people have been brought along that journey, and it's feeling like they are part of it versus having it done to them. And I find that for most of our clients, most people that I work with, particularly in financial services and other, you know, industries that are not exactly, you know, known for a low risk tolerance or a high risk tolerance rather, they tend to adapt well when it's a very well managed kind of change program.
I'll add one thing to that as well, which is like release good products. If you're making loads of changes that people can't make head nor tail of,
yeah,
something's gone wrong way upstream before you're talking about a change management process. You shouldn't need to handhold everybody through laborious change processes to release new products into your organization. Invest more upfront in design.
Release
good product. It's easy.
I feel old at this point, but I've got to ask the question, has anyone used Outlook?
Yes.
Yeah. I had an allergic reaction when I first got the new Outlook. Now I can tell you it's got a lot better and they've softened down the bright buttons and stuff, and it's getting there, but it wasn't great to start with. And so I can really connect actually with the point about people being interestingly resistant to change. I used to work in change management as well, but these things update themselves. Every app updates itself all the time and it gets a new look and feel and a new icon. And I think people are going to, the workforce will adapt to things that change all the time. I think we're at a point in time in history where we're not used to that. We're used to a lot more things being a lot more static. But I think that, I'd be interested to hear points of view from some younger people than me, but I think that people are going to get used to.
Did you find yourself thinking as the user, why do I need this update? Like, it was fine.
I know, I knew I needed it. I needed it. Yeah.
Do you have any other questions on there? And then, Harry, can you take one from online?
Yeah. Sorry, Roloff Opperman. I'm with Cognovum. We're a data center company. Actually, the upgrade is funny because Zoom has upgraded 150 times, and I can't tell any difference. I think to me, it's all about case studies and actual practical examples. So, are there any good examples you have of people, you selling a cloud strategy or adoption and it really boosting productivity? If you could use names or not use names, besides your product, obviously, but like real tangible examples, because I think that's a lot of times what's missing is that you are asking people to take it on faith, as opposed to when you go in and say your competitor's doing this or something like that. So,
Trying to think of a specific example. Does anybody else have any examples?
You can put names if you want.
Well, whilst Chris is thinking, I work a lot with Coca-Cola, and their European bottler has expanded massively over the last 6 years. It's actually a classic case of where you have a consistent CIO for an extended period. So Peter Brickley's been in post, I think, 7 years now. Then the continuity of strategy, and as they've doubled their employee numbers from about circa 12,000 to in excess of 24,000, their ability to deliver that enhanced, that bigger company without an increase in back office costs commensurate with that's been driven essentially by their cloud investments and their ability, for example, to use generative AI to answer HR queries, their ability to, for example, their SAP upgrade, the training materials will be translated into 24 different languages using whether it's generative AI or not, but anyway, some translation engine on the cloud, right? And that has made a real impact. And if you look at the pivot that BP have made towards being a very different company with much more investments in renewables and an EV fleet and so on, that pivot is underpinned by their ability to create new businesses using their cloud infrastructure. So there's definitely very real ones. Chris, got to.
The ones I was going to speak about pale in comparison, but I think you mentioned things like large enterprise scale software platforms, SAP and other ERP platforms, without any impact on headcount and without looking at the cost equation, just looking at performance improvements and uptime improvements from running on the latest hyperscale cloud platform, where they have gone to from having hours or days of outages in a year to having minutes or none. The productivity impact of the cloud in that scenario is significant because their whole business stops when SAP stops. And so there are countless examples like that where the enterprise scale software just runs better and faster without even looking at the cost or labor cost equations. Another example that I believe is reasonably well documented is NTT, that transformed from being a hosting provider to being a cloud company and grew their business massively off the back of their cloud investments, and without increasing their capital outlay, which is another way of looking at productivity. So I think there's plenty of real case studies of the productivity impact and broader benefits, without getting even into, this is not the AI day, that's later in the week, right?
Yeah.
I'll stack there too.
Anyone else want to comment on this? If not, I think Harriet's got something, right?
Okay. Does the UK's process-driven approach to business operations impact the adoption of cloud computing and digital transformation initiatives, and how does it relate to the productivity crisis?
So once you've got more than 4 people on a call, it's just going to go nowhere. And the point ties back to that process of when you start getting into some of these transformation programs, kind of, there's an osmosis as more people join and more people join, and you can see the progress steadily drop and steadily drop. And the worst one is when you have a meeting, the outcome of which is to have another meeting. And we've all been in those. And so I think it ties back to a fleetness of foot. And I'm going to go back to Christensen on this, of saying, we're going to do this thing, so we're going to put it to one side. Here's BAU. This is transformative. We're going to let it run. We're going to let it be free. We're not going to put it into the kind of structure of the organization. And then when it's ready, we're going to start melding the two.
Or letting the smaller one eat the big one. Yeah.
I don't think it's uniquely a UK thing, coming where I come from, but I do think there's that exactly as you described, there's an opportunity to actually try and solve the problem. And if we kind of round back to the topic of conversation around productivity and what we don't see happen with digital transformation quite as much as perhaps we could, is organisations saying, we have a productivity problem. You know, we're here talking about the UK productivity crisis, but at an organisational level to say, actually, that's the outcome we want to drive isn't often the subject of a transformational discussion or debate. And so I think it does relate to the questionnaire online, does relate to the productivity crisis in that, and it also means that the lethargy, the organisational lethargy that you can get around change and transformation, or the fatigue, is not helped by, you know, the lack of ambition, the lack of aspiration, the leadership, the vision to do something differently, whether that is in incubation or in isolation, or it is a mainstream transformation program, or it's an experiment. And all of those things, you know, we see the most impact happen when someone has a really big problem and they want to figure out how to solve it. And whether that's productivity or a transformation in any other kind of outcome, bringing the right small group of people together with the motivation and determination to solve a problem is where the process kind of gets out of the way. And it again ties back to the point about what happened when we didn't have time for process. When we're in a crisis, we proved that we could tackle really big challenges really efficiently and get stuff done.
Are there any other questions? Oh, the one at the back there. Can you just wait for the mic so that you can hear it online? I've got it online.
Hello. Confusingly, I'm the third Marcus in the room. I run a data science company, but I've got a history in aviation and Formula One. So I've been from the high technology, quick turnaround to very process-driven corporate environments. And I recognise process as being a key tenet of producing a quality product. You could not do it without process. You can't get rid of it. How do we leverage technology to use process as a driver of innovation? Because I think that's the only way forwards to have a high quality future that's technology driven.
Maybe. Well, I think using technology to aid our process, I think for me, there's so many tools out there now, and the way that you're going to develop better products is to shorten the feedback loops. Whether that's if you're in an organization, you're trying to build, you know, digital transformation projects, you need to know what's working and what isn't. You make hundreds of decisions. Everybody involved in a technology project, all you're constantly really doing is you're applying your skills, but your decision making about how somebody will experience the product, what will happen under the hood, which technologies to use. And the worst thing you can do in developing a product is sit in a box for too long. You need to shorten the feedback loop. And that's where I think the technologies that we have today can really help with that. We can run, you know, if you're lucky enough to be in an organization that's, well, firstly, game for it. And secondly, you can run things like A/B tests. You can release a small change to a subset of users to test something in isolation to see whether it's doing what you think it will. Because, you know, 9 times out of 10, how you assume somebody's going to use your product is the exact opposite of how they're going to use it. Use is the most infuriating thing in the world. But I think if we can use the technologies we have get that feedback, structure it, and things like user interviews. Now there's some great tooling out there that's, you know, going back to the AI point, summarizing feedback from users, picking out the main points, helping us move quicker through that landscape. That's where I see, you know, as you say, you have to follow a process, you have to be rigorous, because so much of a project will always be communication. And if you're not on the same page about what happens and the steps you're following, communication breaks down, you'll be pointing in different directions, you'll build a Frankenstein mess of a product. So if you can use technology to streamline those processes, I think that's, you're spot on.
Yeah, I think where I would add to that as well is, you know, we've all heard the phrase undifferentiated heavy lifting when it comes to cloud, right? The amount of automation capabilities that exist today. I've spent much of my career in IT ops and managed services. And there is so much that can be done to automate a lot of that work, to allow people the space to go and innovate, to allow people to add value, to manage expectations, communications. There's so much automation that we can do now, whether that, you know, is automated test-driven development. You know, you can create test cases with a lot of these text generation tools. You know, there's ways to integrate that into your development lifecycle and then add automated testing on top. Yes, there's process to that. Well, there's no more strict and consistent of a process than if you can take the human out of the loop, right? So give the humans the space to do what they do exceptionally well, which is think and ideate, and the opportunity to explore and leverage the technology that exists now to take away things like double entry into a form that's going to result in manual errors anyway. So I think the automation piece is the only thing I would add on top of that.
Yeah, certainly.
I suppose the last part is, if part of the process includes the question, what's the consequences of us doing this? And following that, then I vote for it every time.
And then, question from the gentleman here.
Hi, Johnny Fry from a bank called Clearbank, which is a good example if you need an example of a company using cloud technology, because we built the whole of the bank on the cloud. My question is, you've talked about success stories. Fintech is an obvious success in London. What are the cloud providers doing about the threat, and it's going to come, of regulation? Because at the moment we have 67% market share with 3 companies, 1 Chinese, 3 American, and we're becoming more and more dependent and reliant on AWS, Google, etc., and yourselves. So we are in a situation where if Uncle Sam turns off 3, and the Chinese turn off the other one, that's 67% of the cloud provision, and that's a huge risk in the financial service sector. So what you're encouraging us to use cloud, but what are you doing in terms of making sure you're ready for that inevitable day of regulation?
Firstly, I'm going to split hairs on words again, noting a theme here, which is, and suggest that public cloud is what you're talking about there, obviously, but the cloud itself in its purest form is a set of capabilities which originated with the hyperscalers, but isn't necessarily solely with them today. So that would be my first point on that. And my VP, if it's my VP, always says, how would we have felt at the beginning of the Ukraine-Russian war if those cloud providers had been coming out of Moscow as opposed to the US? And it is that geopolitical risk that could present itself. And I think that is something that is a serious problem, because while we are fairly confident that Great Britain and the United States are on the same page broadly, that may not always be the case.
But it's not just the geopolitical one, it's the fact that more and more financial service companies are relying on the cloud because you guys are doing your job, selling cloud, and actually the companies don't control the cloud, therefore they're not, the ones that are being regulated can't control the outcome, the cloud providers can. So the regulators are going to come from the cloud providers. So how well are you preparing yourselves for that?
Is there a line to take, Chris?
No comment.
What I would say is, you know, if we think back to telephony, right? When you look at all these interconnected systems, there will absolutely, again, this is the opinion of an individual, not the company, there will be a stance taken from a regulatory perspective around interoperability, and around what I would call that foundational capability, the IaaS services is probably a pretty fair place to start. I think it's pretty safe to say, having worked across all of the hyperscalers, the IaaS capabilities are pretty similar. And I think there are pluses and minuses to each platform, particularly when you look at the broader ecosystem. I think there will come a day where regulatory pressure will exist to protect that foundational piece. I do think that there will be a segmentation between kind of the foundational core services that is necessary for, emulating a mainframe in the cloud, right? You're going to need that capability to be somewhat protected and interoperable so that AWS doesn't pull the plug or Google doesn't pull the plug, et cetera, right? Highly unlikely because it's not in their financial interest, but that's a discussion for a different day. I do think, though, that there will always be that space for innovation outside of the regulation. And so companies have to look at what their risk and cost profile is going, whether it's hybrid and being able to maintain some of that security and some of that, legacy technology integration in a way that they have complete control over versus the opportunity to leverage more innovation where it makes sense for their business. So I think it's our job, as leaders in the technology space to advise our own internal stakeholders and our clients around the different options and what makes sense long term, because sometimes public cloud might not be the right answer for a particular workload based on potential regulatory concerns. So I think you've got to look at the whole spectrum of what cloud really means these days.
And I think what are the cloud companies doing is only one half of the question for me. So what are they doing? Well, first of all, they're saying there's many reasons why it's not a good idea to regulate us. And that's actually quite true. There are many reasons why they should be regulated. But then when regulatory pressure is applied, then they generally find a way to compromise. And actually, sometimes they release kind of function and feature that the regulator likes before being forced to do so because they can see it's the direction of travel. And if you look at the Activision acquisition in the end, that, so for me, the other half of the question is, what do we actually want, right? As a government and as a country, what do we actually want them to do? Because they seem kind of okay to do it in the end. I mean, but what do we want? So my hope is that there's some really talented civil servants listening to techUK, I hope, who are preparing whoever the next government is, a nice paper so that they can understand and act on that. Because, I go back to the point that the three things that economists say holds the UK back in productivity, the third is the lack of a clear regulatory framework. If I'm an enterprise, though, then I would be planning to make my estate a lot more dynamic so that I can respond to all events. And on a personal level, I am considering a mass eBay purchase of P-Series, a derelict battery, and becoming a kind of data center doomsday cultist.
Fair enough. Running out of time. Are there any more questions in the room? One at the back there, and then if there's any online, do you want to add them?
Cover to a whole different level.
David Douglas, PMS Limited. I'd like to thank the panel. This is a highly complex subject that we're all discussing, and I think there's a 20-year game span on all of this, even though the world I'm in is moving, changing every week. I'm in AI. And I would say that for most organizations out there, they're going to struggle, really going to struggle with all of this. Reason being is because business change, big challenge, digital transformation, same applies. Add AI to that, technology. People are already in overload in terms of understanding the changes that are coming. And we're just starting, as it were. So it means that the technology itself needs to be easy for the user to engage, the user experience, as you guys have said. Failing that, it's going to be a massive struggle, massive upheaval. And Adrian, it's usually the top 5% that are well-led with curious leaders that permutates down the management structure. And they get with the game plan. For everybody else, take the 80-20, be generous. Massive, massive problem coming. So I haven't really got a question. All I'm saying is that we're in an interesting space right now, and it's not going to change for some time. But you will see who the winners and losers are over the next couple of years in every sector very, very quickly. Believe me, because the changes that are coming with artificial intelligence, not just Gen AI, which is being thrown at everything to see what sticks, that is so resource hungry, it's untrue. And I go back to the incumbents for that, because that's the game that they're playing. And many have been sucked into it. The smart ones will be tailoring the use of AI to solve problems in many, many areas. And right now, AI is a desert in business operations. And that is where the gold is. I'll leave it at that.
It's all right.
I'll be interested to hear what you guys say.
I'll add an alternative to a question. Based on what the gentleman said, I'd be curious to how you all feel about how you can actually do digital transformation in the time frames and time scales that the tech is changing, when businesses are used to operating in a much slower, long lead pace when doing that kind of big scale change.
Thank you, Chris.
I'll just jump in with kind of the thing that comes to my mind. One of the things that I think BP in general has done really, really well over the last several years is they've become curious. And I think when you think about what that means to leaders in an organization, finance, not someone we traditionally engage when we think about digital transformation, legal, these are the functions we often see as blockers. And as like, oh, I got to go talk to legal. Oh boy. All right, I need a shot of whiskey before I do this, right? That's our mindset a lot of times. But actually, if we can approach it and help them be curious, if we can help other leaders in the organization be curious, it starts conversation on, oh, well, what would value in 6 months look like? And, excuse me, finance team, what are the chances that we could think through and work through a different model for this in next year's budget, right? How would we approach that?
So bring them in early.
Yeah, bring those business users, bring and engage them early, and be curious with how they operate and how you can help them.
Any other advice on how to do fast-paced transformation?
I think just to reiterate one of the points that's been made a number of times, which is that creating the space, in isolation from BAU, doing experimentation, doing it safely, and absolutely sparking that curiosity. But fun fact, the one area least digitally transformed in the UK is procurement. But you're right. Again, the hype is getting people curious. It's actually making people in procurement curious, HR more curious, finance more curious about digital transformation and what it can mean. But there's lots of lessons that have been learned. And I love the point about design thinking is a skill we need a lot more people to have. And absolutely looking at how we can do experiments in, without disrupting. That's where you can drive change at pace, is where you've created the space to do exactly that.
We are pretty much out of time, but I just want to ask, is there any other questions online?
There is.
Want to bring one more?
Do you believe diverse teams can better address the unique needs and challenges of different user groups or stakeholders impacted by cloud computing and digital transformation initiatives in the UK, ultimately contributing to a broader productivity gain?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, but I think more important is why. And I think it relates to the last question, because attitude is the key thing, and culture. Ultimately, you need a strategy for sure, but Vicky said something earlier about look at the outcome and ask people to get the outcome. And if you have that, and you have the right culture, and that I think is more prevalent when we have diverse teams.
We've covered a lot of points around the human transformation elements and how the difficult bit is the organizational dynamics. It's the same with building any product. If you have non-diverse teams building products, you will naturally limit the scope of your product, and you won't build as an effect. It's well proven at this point. So I think we're putting a glass ceiling on ourselves if we don't produce. And this comes back to training of talent. We know we've got a problem with diversity in the tech industry. So yeah, I think it's a really good question, because that is one of the things that will hold us back if we can't build the best products to unlock that productivity for a diverse group of people, because the UK workforce is diverse. It's all of us. So we need people building the products that represent that diversity.
Next year I'll put human transformation instead of digital transformation. Oh yes, one last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Tamsin Fox-Davis from System Seed. Just to follow on that last question, looking at the diversity of the panel, do you feel that some people need to step back in order to allow that diversity to happen? Because it's great that everybody thinks that more diverse teams are better, but when we have a panel that's all white and only one woman, we're not there. So I would love to know if any of you are doing something internally where actually the next time you get invited on this panel, there's going to be someone else that you would actually put forward for it.
That's not my fault. He asked me.
White guy.
I think it's a great question, and just to add to it, for anyone wants to comment, as someone who is always trying to find speakers for these panels, I can't tell you how many times I've messaged someone in an organisation who would have been a more diverse speaker, and they've messaged back and said, my boss would like to take this slot. And yeah, that
name and shame.
More than you would think.
Yes.
But that does happen more than you would think, which is really, really unfortunate. And then you have to awkwardly say, well, I wasn't asking for what, and move on. So yeah, I think it's a really great question about what organisations can do internally. Does anyone have any advice?
Well, no, I was actually going to say, I mean, I know on the cloud committee how hard techUK have tried to make the makeup of the committee more diverse than the original application list. I mean, I actually agree with you. I do think there's an element of stepping back that's needed, and an element of consciously including others in your place. Which is something that we do, although the evidence of it is not transparent in the room. I appreciate that, but I think it is part of it, and I think it's part of that kind of, it's a dimension of that curiosity point, I suppose. It's being curious about what other points other people can make at these things.
I think that's the right to ask the question. Yes, we should.
I think you got to be careful though, because we don't know what your ethical makeup is. I don't think you should judge people based on right. So I think we be careful. I understand the sentiment of your point, but you don't know these people, right? You don't know their individual stories or what their ethical makeup is. So I think we just have to be careful.
Or neurodiversity and other invisible differences. I do think it's a really good point, but I think the broader opportunity for us as a tech industry is how do we make generational change, right? We can definitely do things and agree, and we can always be more conscious about the decisions we make, you know, on a daily basis ourselves. But how are we setting up future generations to have better representation in every way, shape, and form, and creating, you know, early and career opportunities so that comes through the workforce? You have the challenge you have because of the industry that's part of, and the challenge it has at the point in time today. You know, we're doing a lot of work, and I'm, you know, part of that in trying to address what that looks like in the future, so that it's easy for you to pick up the phone and get a more visibly diverse.
I think to end on a positive with that, so it's a really brave question to ask. So thank you for raising it. I think the thing that we can do, for me, it's not necessarily people stepping back, but being conscious of the atmosphere and making sure that we're creating the space for diverse thought, for, you know, valuing that diversity when we're making decisions as well. Because whilst we, you know, it might take a generation, and I think that's just the sad truth of where we're at in the industry today with the levels of talent we have coming through representing that diversity. We can, you know, do unconscious bias training. We can create the right forums. We can pull people in. We can, you know, there are things we can do to help that. And I think it's on all of us as leaders to make sure we're creating that space. So thank you for asking the question.
Well, huge thanks to everyone in the room for coming out, and to those who are online. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so I'll save my nosy question that was going to be real nasty.
It was.
and I won't put you on the spot, but there's going to be refreshments outside for those who want to come and have a chat with us afterwards. And I just want to say we've got an awful lot of great content coming out this week, Cloud Week. Please keep an eye out on techUK's social media channels and engage with all of the great stuff that's going on there. There's another event tomorrow on digital transformation in the UK public sector, and one on Wednesday looking at green ops and sustainability. So if you're interested in any of that, please do keep an eye out for the links. I'd ask you to do it, me thanking the panel in the usual way. Food. I just take all of them like this, unburden yourself. I know. Yes. Was that your one?
Sorry.
No worries.
Don't tear the side. Very
Nice. Yeah, some people put type essays in there. We just let's find out more.